The bank manager wouldn't look at my son anymore. She was looking at me. "Mr. Whitaker," she said carefully, folding her hands over a thin stack of papers. "For clarity, you are the sole controlling authority of Whitaker Holdings. No changes have been made." My son shifted beside me. I could feel the heat coming off him, though he tried to keep his voice steady. "That can't be right," Daniel said. "I have power of attorney. We filed everything last month. His accounts are consolidated under my supervision." The word supervision lingered in the air longer than it should have. The manager offered him a professional smile. Polite, immovable. "You do have limited authority over the secondary personal checking account," she said. "However, the primary trust and holding structure were never included in that document." Daniel blinked. "Just once. It was small, but I saw it." "That's not possible," he replied. "I canceled his credit cards. I restricted online access. I've been managing everything." I rested my hands on the table. They were steady. "I made sure of that." "You've been managing what I allowed you to manage," I said. Silence settled across the conference room, the kind that hums. Daniel turned to me then, really looked at me as if seeing something unfamiliar, or perhaps remembering something he'd chosen to forget. "Dad," he said, lowering his voice, "we talked about this. You said you were overwhelmed. I was helping you." I met his eyes. Steel blue, like mine used to be before age softened them. "I said I was tired," I answered. "That isn't the same thing." The manager slid another document across the table toward me. I signed it without hesitation, across from us. Daniel's confidence, the kind that comes from believing the future already belongs to you, began to thin. What he didn't understand, what he had never bothered to ask, was that the accounts he locked were never the foundation. They were the porch light, and he had forgotten there was an entire house behind it. 3 weeks earlier, my credit card had declined at a grocery store I'd been shopping at for 15 years. That was the first sign something had changed. Before the card stopped working, before the meetings and the paperwork and the careful conversations behind glass doors, my life was quiet, not small, just quiet. I wake most mornings at 5:30, the way I have since I was 22 years old. Some habits stay with you longer than ambition. I grind my own coffee beans. I read the financial pages in print, not because I don't understand technology, but because I prefer the weight of paper in my hands. There's something grounding about turning a page deliberately. My home sits at the edge of a lake just outside the city. Not enormous, not flashy. It's paid for. I built it 20 years ago when my wife, Eleanor, said she wanted a place where the water was the first thing she saw in the morning. After she passed, I considered selling it. Daniel suggested as much more than once. "It's too much house for one person, Dad." "It isn't. It's exactly enough. The dock needs sanding every spring. The gutters clog in autumn. The boiler complains in January. I handle all of it. Slowly, perhaps, but competently. People have a way of confusing age with fragility. I've never understood that. For 40 years, I built a logistics firm from a rented warehouse with 2 trucks into a regional operation that now moves medical equipment across 3 states. I stepped back from daily operations at 70, but I never stepped away entirely. There are still quarterly reports addressed to me, still decisions that require my signature. I like it that way. Daniel grew up around that business. As a boy, he'd sit on a stack of pallets in my office and spin in my chair while I worked. When he was older, I offered him a position. He declined, politely, confidently. Finance was more his style, he said. Cleaner, faster. He did well for himself. I've always been proud of that. After Eleanor died, Daniel began calling more frequently. At first, it felt like kindness. He'd stop by on Sundays with his wife, Marissa. They'd bring takeout I didn't need and insist on checking the smoke detectors. "You can't be too careful," Marissa would say brightly, already standing on a chair before I could answer. I let them. Grief changes the shape of a house. It also changes how people look at you inside it. There's a softness at first, then gradually an assessment, a quiet inventory of what you can still manage on your own. "Are you sleeping all right?" Daniel asked me one evening last winter. "Well enough. Any trouble remembering appointments?" "No." He nodded, but in a way that suggested he was keeping score. I noticed small things. He began opening my mail without asking, saying he was just organizing. He frowned at my checkbook register, even though it balanced to the penny. He asked for the passwords to my online banking in case of emergency. There are procedures for emergencies, I told him. He smiled. Sure, I just don't want you stressed. Stressed, it's a curious word to use with a man who has negotiated contracts worth more than your mortgage. Still, I told myself he meant well. Children don't always know how to help aging parents without overreaching. I tried to see it through that lens. On Thursdays, I meet 3 old colleagues for breakfast at a diner near the highway. We talk about markets, politics, cholesterol levels. We complain about the price of diesel, even though none of us drives a truck anymore. It's ritual more than necessity. One morning, after I paid the check, in cash as I often do, my friend Harold leaned back and said, "Your boy hovering much these days?" I looked at him. Hovering? He called me last week, Harold said. Asked if you seemed distracted. The word landed gently, but it landed. What did you tell him? I asked. That you beat me at golf last month and still read balance sheets for fun. I nodded. We didn't speak of it again. At home, I began paying closer attention. Not suspicious, just attentive. Daniel's questions grew more specific. Have you thought about simplifying your accounts? They are simple. You've got multiple institutions, Dad. It's inefficient. They serve different purposes. He would pause at that, as if the idea of layered structure offended him. One evening, standing in my kitchen while the kettle warmed, he said it plainly. I just don't want someone taking advantage of you. The irony of that sentence would only become clear later, but at the time I placed a hand on his shoulder and said, I appreciate the concern, and I meant it. I did not yet understand that concern can be the first step toward control. The first time Daniel used the word decline, he said it softly. We were sitting on my back porch in early spring. The lake was still, undecided about whether it was winter or not. Marissa had stayed inside, claiming emails. Daniel held 2 mugs of coffee, though he'd added sugar to mine without asking. You forgot to pay the water bill last month, he said, as if mentioning the weather. I paid it, I replied. It drafts automatically on the 15th. He nodded slowly. Right, that's what you said. But I saw a late notice on the counter. I let that sit between us. That was from 2 years ago, I said. I keep old paperwork until I shred it. He exhaled, leaning back. Dad, I'm not trying to nitpick. I've noticed a few things, such as... He hesitated, as though arranging the words carefully enough would make them harmless. You repeat stories sometimes. You get dates mixed up. And with everything online now, scams, fraud, it's easy to miss something. I studied him. His expression wasn't cruel. It was clinical, analytical, the way a banker might assess risk. I built a company in a recession, I said evenly. I negotiated fuel contracts when prices doubled overnight. I think I can manage an email. That's not what I mean. Then what do you mean? He leaned forward, lowering his voice. I mean, I'm worried. You're 72. There's no shame in needing support. There it was, carefully framed, impossible to argue without sounding defensive. I don't need support, I said. I need respect. His jaw tightened at that, just briefly. Respect goes both ways, Dad. Letting me help isn't weakness. The word help stretched thin. Over the next week, he called twice more. Sent an article about elder fraud. Forwarded a story about a retired engineer who'd wired money to a fake contractor. It happens to smart people, he texted. I didn't respond. The following Sunday, he arrived with a folder. I set up an appointment with my advisor, he said, placing it on the dining table as though it were already decided. Just to streamline things. Consolidate accounts. Add me as backup. Backup, I repeated. In case something happens. Hospitalization, confusion, you wouldn't even notice a difference day to day. That last sentence lingered. You wouldn't even notice. I opened the folder. Tabs divided into neat sections. Power of attorney forms. Joint account authorizations. Beneficiary updates highlighted in yellow. You've been busy, I said. I'm trying to be proactive. Without asking me, I'm asking now. We sat across from one another at the same oak table where he'd once done homework. I remembered correcting his math, showing him where he'd rushed. "You think I'm slipping," I said. He looked down at his hands. "I think it's responsible to plan." "That isn't what I asked." Silence. Then quietly, "I think you might not see it if you were." It was a careful sentence, designed to trap any denial as proof. I felt something shift inside me then. Not anger, not yet, but awareness. A subtle recognition that the conversation was no longer about preparation. It was about authority. "Let's say I agree," I said after a moment. "What exactly would you control?" "Just the main checking account. Credit cards, bill pay, day-to-day stuff. The rest can stay as is. The rest." He said it casually, as if it were clutter in a garage. "And this would make you feel better?" I asked. "It would make me less worried." The framing was clever. If I refused, I was choosing his anxiety over cooperation. I folded my hands. Limited authority. Specific account. Nothing else, of course, no restructuring. No transfers without my signature. Absolutely. And this ends the conversation about my competency. He hesitated. "Dad, it's not about competency. It is to me." He held my gaze, calculating. Then he nodded. "Fine." We signed the initial documents 2 days later at his advisor's office. I read every line. The authority was narrow, tied to one personal account I rarely used except for household expenses, my primary structures, the ones connected to the business. The trust Eleanor and I built remained untouched. Daniel seemed almost impatient as the papers were notarized. "This is good," he said, relief softening his shoulders. "This is smart." On the drive home, I told myself I had done the practical thing. Aging isn't a competition. Delegation can be wisdom, but wisdom requires balance. 3 days later, I logged into my online banking and found my password invalid. I assumed I'd mistyped it. On the 4th attempt, the account locked. I called Daniel. "Oh," he said lightly. "Yeah, I reset everything. Safer if I manage access directly. Less confusion." "Confusion," I repeated. "It's temporary, Dad. Trust me. Trust me." That was the first moment I felt the ground shift beneath what we had agreed to, and it would not be the last. The first credit card stopped working on a Tuesday. I was at Halpern's Market, the small grocery store 5 minutes from my house. I've known the owner for years. We discussed produce the way other men discuss sports. I handed the cashier my card without thinking. She inserted it, waited, then tried again. "I'm sorry, Mr. Whitaker," she said gently. "It's declining." "That's odd," I replied. "Run it once more." She did. Same result. A few people shifted behind me in line. I felt it, not accusation exactly, but attention. My age, a declined card carries a certain implication. "It must be a fraud alert," I said calmly. "I'll sort it out." I paid in cash. I always carry some. Old habits are rarely accidental. In the parking lot, I called the number on the back of the card. After navigating the menu, a young man came on the line. "Sir, this card was closed 3 days ago at the request of the authorized account manager." "I did not request it," I said. One moment. Keys clicked in the background. "The request was submitted by Daniel Whitaker. He's listed under your power of attorney." I watched a shopping cart roll slowly across the asphalt in the wind. "I see," I said. He indicated it was part of a consolidation process. Consolidation. I thanked the young man and ended the call. Daniel answered on the second ring. "Hey, Dad, you closed my card. It's simpler this way," he said, as though explaining a minor household adjustment. Too many open lines increase risk. We agreed on one account, and that's the one I'm optimizing. The card was tied to it. I've used that card for 15 years. You won't need it. I set up automatic payments for everything. If you need something, just let me know. Just let me know. The phrasing was subtle. Permission inverted. "I don't ask my son for grocery money," I said evenly. "You're not asking," he replied, a slight edge entering his voice. "I'm protecting you. From what?" I almost asked. Instead, I said, "Restore the card." There was a pause. "Let's give this a few weeks. See how it goes." The line between assistance and authority had dissolved. That evening, I attempted to log into my investment portal. one of the secondary personal accounts we had discussed. Access denied. I called the institution directly. "Mr. Whitaker," the representative said, "we've received updated management instructions. Your son has been listed as primary contact for this account." "Primary," I repeated. "Yes, sir. Under durable power of attorney provisions. That authority was limited. I can only see what's on file." I ended the call slowly. Over the next several days, the pattern repeated. The utility company redirected confirmation emails to Daniel's address. My brokerage platform required approval from him to initiate transfers. Even my insurance portal had been updated with his phone number as the first point of contact. Each change was technically defensible. Each one small enough to explain away. Together, they formed a perimeter. On Friday afternoon, I drove into the city and walked into the branch office of the bank where we had signed the paperwork. The receptionist recognized my name immediately. "Mr. Whitaker, Mr. Daniels handles your file." Of course he does, I thought. Mr. Daniels greeted me with professional warmth. "Late 40s. Careful smile. How can we help today?" "I'd like a printed copy of the authority granted under my recent power of attorney," I said. He hesitated, just briefly, then retrieved the file. As I read, I noticed language I did not recall approving. Clauses referencing associated instruments and related financial tools. Broad phrasing, elastic enough to stretch. "This was not my understanding," I said. "It's standard protective language," he replied. "Your son expressed concern about potential exposure." Exposure? Did he express concern about me? I asked. Mr. Daniels chose his next sentence with care. "He mentioned occasional confusion." I folded the document neatly. "I am not confused," I said. "Of course not, sir. This is simply precautionary. Precaution can look remarkably similar to takeover when viewed from the correct angle." That night, I drove to Daniel's house without calling first. He opened the door with mild surprise. "Dad, we need to revisit the scope of this arrangement," I said. Marissa hovered in the hallway behind him. "Everything's fine," Daniel replied quickly. "You're overreacting, am I?" "Yes, you said you were overwhelmed." I stepped in. I said I was tired. Same difference. No, not the same difference. I looked past him into the home he had built. Modern, immaculate, efficient. Very much his. I agreed to assistance, I said quietly. "Not replacement. You're making this dramatic. I'm making it clear." For a moment, something flickered across his face. Not guilt, not yet, but irritation. As though I were complicating a plan that should have been seamless. "You don't need to handle this anymore," he said. "That's the point." I held his gaze, and who decided that? He didn't answer. Instead, he said, "Trust me." I had trusted him. That was precisely the problem. The second card failed on a Sunday. Church had just let out, and a group of us walked to the cafe across the street the way we always do. I reached for the navy leather wallet Eleanor gave me on our 30th anniversary. The habit is muscle memory now. Card between two fingers, polite nod, done. This time the machine beeped once and flashed red. Declined. The young man behind the counter tried again without comment. Same result. "It must be the network," I said lightly. "It's been steady all morning," he replied. I could feel the eyes. Not judgment exactly, curiosity, concern maybe. At 72, financial friction suggests vulnerability. Harold stepped forward quietly. "I've got it," he said, sliding his own card across. "I don't need covering," I answered. "Of course not." Humor me, I let him outside. He didn't ask questions. He simply handed me the receipt as if it were mine. That restraint meant more than anything he might have said. In the car, I called the credit card company directly. "This account was permanently closed per request of the authorized agent," the woman explained. "A new controlled disbursement structure has been established." "Controlled by whom?" I asked, though I already knew. "Daniel Whitaker." I ended the call and sat in the parking lot longer than necessary. It is a peculiar thing to feel your independence shrink in real time. No alarms, no dramatic confrontations. Just access narrowing, one authorization at a time. That afternoon I drove to Daniel's house again. Marissa answered. "Oh," she said. a flicker of surprise crossing her face. Daniel's on a call. Do you want to wait? I'll wait. She gestured toward the living room. I took a seat near the hallway without meaning to. Their office door was half closed. Daniel's voice carried more clearly than he realized. Yeah, it's basically centralized now, he was saying. He doesn't even log in anymore. A pause. No, he doesn't notice most of it. I told you, he was getting overwhelmed. Another pause. A quieter laugh. It's better this way, safer, and honestly. It was going to be mine eventually. Silence answered him on the other end, but I didn't need to hear it. It was going to be mine eventually. Not ours. Not his mother's legacy. Not something stewarded. Mine. I remained seated. A few seconds later, his office door opened. He stopped short when he saw me. Dad, I didn't know you were here. I can see that. Marissa retreated to the kitchen. Daniel's expression shifted quickly, recalibrating. What's going on? He asked. You closed the second card. It was redundant. It was functional. You don't need multiple lines of credit. I don't need permission to buy coffee. He sighed. You're focusing on the wrong thing. Enlighten me. This is about long-term stability. You built something significant. It needs structure. It has structure. It had complexity. The correction was subtle, past tense. And complexity invites mistakes, he continued. Dad, you said yourself you were tired of managing details. I said I was tired, I repeated evenly. You supplied the rest. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration surfacing. Why are you fighting this? I'm your son, yes, I said. You are, and for a moment that was all I could say. The deeper wound was not financial. It was tonal. The quiet confidence in his voice when he said I didn't notice. The assumption of inevitability. He believed the transition had already occurred, that I had simply not caught up to it yet. I want full access restored. I said finally, that's not reasonable. It is my name on the accounts. It's my responsibility now. There it was. Responsibility as though I had abdicated something without realizing. I stood. You misunderstood the agreement, I said. And perhaps me, Dad. No, I replied softly. I heard enough. He watched me walk to the door, his certainty thinning but not yet gone. In the driveway, I paused before getting into my car. He had centralized the visible accounts. The household lines. The ones connected to daily life. But there are layers to any structure built carefully over decades. And Daniel had only ever shown interest in the surface. That night, I made one phone call, not to Daniel, to someone who had known my signature longer than my son had known how to write his own name. Called Margaret Ellis at 7:15 the next morning. She answered on the second ring. Good morning. Charles. Her voice carried the same steady composure it had for nearly 25 years. Margaret had overseen the corporate side of my affairs since the company expanded beyond a single warehouse. She was not easily rattled, and more importantly, she was not easily impressed. I need an hour of your time, I said. You have it. In person? Yes. Her office sits on the 14th floor of a limestone building downtown. Discreet signage, frosted glass, the kind of place that values quiet over spectacle. When I arrived, she stood to shake my hand, not out of politeness, but respect. There is a difference. You look well, she said, studying me briefly. I am well. We sat across from each other at a conference table large enough to seat 12, though it was just us. I assume this isn't social, she said. My son believes he controls my financial life. Margaret did not blink. Does he? He has power of attorney over a personal checking account. Limited, specific. Yet credit lines are closed. Access points redirected. Language expanded. She nodded once. I saw the updated filings. You saw them? Daniel requested copies of certain documents 3 weeks ago. We declined. I felt something settle in my chest. On what grounds? Lack of authority. She turned her monitor slightly so I could see. A familiar structure diagram filled the screen. Boxes and lines representing decades of layered planning. At the top sat Whitaker Holdings, LLC, beneath it, the operating company. To the right, the family trust Eleanor and I established the year Daniel graduated college. Separate, distinct. Your son's power of attorney, Margaret continued, was filed with one retail banking institution. It grants transactional authority over the personal household account ending in 2147. That is what I signed. Yes, it does not extend to the holding company, the trust, or any associated investment vehicles managed under this office. And the language about associated instruments applies only within that bank's internal ecosystem. It has no jurisdiction here. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. He's been speaking as though everything is centralized. Margaret's expression remained neutral. Only the porch light, Charles. I glanced at her. She gave the faintest hint of a smile. The foundation remains where it has always been. Daniel had closed cards tied to a secondary personal account, the one used for groceries, utilities, minor expenses. It was visible, tangible, easy to manipulate, but the company distributions flowed elsewhere. The primary income streams fed into the trust. The trust held controlling interest in the operating entity. Layers, deliberate layers. If I chose to, I asked, could I revoke his authority immediately? Yes. She slid a single-page document toward me. This removes him from the household account as agent. The bank will comply within 24 hours. And the broader structure? Untouched. Silence settled comfortably between us. Did he attempt access beyond his scope? I asked. He inquired, she said. Politely. We informed him that without your direct instruction, no information would be released. There was no accusation in her tone, no judgment, just facts. He mentioned concern about your cognitive clarity, she added. I met her eyes. And what did you say? That you chaired the last quarterly review without notes and corrected a valuation error our analyst missed. A faint warmth touched my chest, not pride. Exactly, but affirmation. Charles, she said carefully, aging does not require surrender. Assistance can coexist with authority, but they are not the same. No, I agreed. They are not. I signed the revocation form. The pen moved smoothly across the page. Would you like to schedule a formal review? Margaret asked, in case your son requests a meeting? Yes, I said. Schedule it. She studied me for a moment. You intend to make this instructional. I intend to make it clear. When I left her office, the city felt sharper. Not hostile, defined. Daniel had mistaken proximity for ownership, visibility for control. He had redirected mail and closed cards and spoken confidently about consolidation, but he had never asked the most important question, where is the root? And roots, unlike branches, are not easily seen from the outside. Daniel arrived 10 minutes early. Margaret's assistant showed him into the main conference room, the larger one, with the long walnut table and the city skyline framed behind glass. I was already seated at the far end. He paused when he saw me. Dad, he said, surprised but recovering quickly. You didn't mention you'd be here. I thought it best. He took the chair halfway down the table rather than beside me. A subtle choice. Not adversarial, not aligned. Margaret entered a moment later, followed by Thomas Reed, our outside counsel, a man whose memory for corporate bylaws is almost surgical. Mr. Whitaker, Margaret said to me with a nod before acknowledging Daniel. Thank you both for coming. Daniel placed a leather folder on the table. I appreciate everyone making time, he began smoothly. I think it's important we streamline oversight. My father's expressed feeling overwhelmed, and I've stepped in to reduce exposure. The phrasing was polished, practiced. Thomas folded his hands. Exposure to what, specifically? Fraud risk. Cognitive fatigue. Fragmented asset management. I watched Daniel as he spoke. Confident, certain, he believed he was being responsible. Margaret turned slightly toward him. You currently hold limited power of attorney over a personal checking account at First National Bank. Is that correct? Yes, he said. And associated instruments. Associated, Thomas repeated. Within that institution, Daniel hesitated. That was my understanding. Margaret slid a document across the table, the original filing. The authority granted to you, she said calmly, is restricted to account ending in 2147 and its internally linked debit instruments. It does not extend to Whitaker Holdings, the Whitaker Family Trust, or any managed investment accounts under this office. Daniel looked from the paper to her. That can't be right, he said. I've already consolidated. You've consolidated retail access points, Margaret replied. Credit cards and online credentials tied to that single account. He turned to me then. Dad. We discussed simplifying everything. We discussed assistance, I said evenly. You said you were tired. I am. Of repeating myself. A flicker of irritation crossed his face. With respect, he said, now addressing the room. This is exactly the kind of resistance that signals risk. He doesn't see the bigger picture. Thomas adjusted his glasses. Mr. Whitaker chaired last quarter's board review, he said. He identified a depreciation miscalculation our firm initially missed. Does that align with your assessment of incapacity? Daniel's jaw tightened. I never said incapacitated. You implied diminished capacity, Margaret said gently. We take that seriously. Silence settled. Daniel shifted in his chair. I'm trying to protect what he built. And what precisely do you believe he built? I asked. He looked at me, surprised by the question. The company. The assets. The portfolio, I nodded. And where do you believe those reside? In the consolidated structure. Which structure? He opened his folder, flipping through printed summaries, retail account balances, transaction histories, numbers he recognized. Margaret rotated her monitor again, displaying the full organizational chart, Whitaker Holdings at the top. Beneath it, the operating entity. To the side, the trust. Separate tax IDs, separate governance. Daniel stared at it. This wasn't in the documents I reviewed, he said quietly. No, Margaret replied, because you were not authorized to review them. A flush crept up his neck. You're saying I control nothing? I'm saying, Thomas interjected evenly, you control exactly what was granted to you. A household expense account. The words were not cruel. They were precise. Daniel looked at me again, and this time the confidence had thinned. Why didn't you tell me? He asked. You didn't ask, I said. He leaned back, absorbing that. I thought. He stopped, recalibrated. I thought you wanted me to take over. I wanted you to help pay the electric bill if I was in the hospital. The room was very quiet. Margaret slid another paper forward. The revocation notice? As of this morning, she said. Mr. Whitaker has rescinded your power of attorney over account 2147. First National has been notified. Access will revert fully within 24 hours. Daniel stared at the page. You're removing me, he said. Not to Margaret, to me. I am restoring clarity, I replied. This makes it look like I did something wrong. That depends, I said calmly, on why you did it. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The skyline behind him reflected faintly in the glass. Sharp lines, hard edges. It was going to be mine eventually, he said finally, softer now. Eventually, I agreed. Is not the same as now. Thomas gathered the documents neatly. If there are future discussions about succession, he said, they will occur through formal channels with explicit consent. Daniel nodded once, though it seemed more reflex than agreement. When the meeting ended, he remained seated for a moment longer than necessary. I stood. Walk with me, I said. He did. We walked the length of the corridor without speaking. The building was quiet at that hour, the particular hush of glass and carpet and people working behind closed doors. Daniel matched my pace, hands in his pockets, shoulders drawn slightly inward. At the end of the hall, tall windows overlooked the river. I stopped there. You may say what you need to say, I told him. He exhaled. You embarrassed me in there. I corrected the record. In front of Margaret. In front of Reed. In front of the same people you contacted 3 weeks. You would go to inquire about my competence. He didn't answer. A barge moved slowly beneath the bridge. Below us, I wasn't trying to steal from you, he said finally. I believe that, I replied. Which makes it more serious, not less. He turned toward me. How is that worse? Because a thief knows he's taking something. You believed it was already yours, the words landed. He didn't deflect them. You closed my cards without telling me, I continued. You changed my passwords. You spoke to my banker about my mind. Not one of those actions required my agreement in your view. I thought I was ahead of a problem. You were ahead of me, I said. That was the appeal. He looked out at the water. Dad, do you know what it's like watching you get older? You slow down. You repeat things. I am 72, I said. Not absent. I know. Then act like it. There was no anger in my voice. That was perhaps what made it land. I built that company from 2 trucks, I said. I made payroll in a recession when 3 competitors folded. I buried your mother and kept the business running because 200 families depended on it. I'm not a liability to be managed. He was quiet. I never said you were. You arranged my life as though I were. He rubbed the back of his neck. A gesture he'd had since he was 9. What happens now? He asked. Your access ends today. The cards are reinstated in my name. Bill pay reverts. Correspondence returns to my address. And between us? I considered that carefully. That depends on you, he frowned. You're not cutting me off. No, I said. That would be theater. He blinked, uncertain how to take that. I don't punish people, Daniel. I adjust arrangements. We stood together a while longer. I do want help someday, I said, when it's needed. But help begins with a question, not a filing. He nodded slowly. I should have asked. Yes, I convinced myself asking would insult you. It would have honored me. That, I think, was the sentence that reached him. By that evening, everything had reverted. First National restored my online credentials at 4:12 p.m. My credit cards were reissued and expedited. The utility accounts were corrected within 2 business days. My mail resumed arriving at my own mailbox, which I collected myself on foot as I always had. Margaret called Friday morning. Everything is clean, she said. No unauthorized transfers occurred. He moved nothing. I know. You knew before we checked. He wanted control, I said. Not currency. Some would consider that a distinction without a difference. Some haven't raised a son. She let that sit. Do you want protective measures added? She asked. Notification triggers. Dual authorization. Yes, I said. Quietly. Not punitively. Understood. The following Sunday, Daniel came to the lake house. He didn't bring a folder. He brought coffee. Black, the way I actually drink it. We sat on the porch. The lake had decided at last that it was spring. I resigned from the advisory arrangement, he said. With my firm. The one that flagged your file. I looked at him. You didn't need to do that. I did. We sat quietly for a while. The gutters need clearing, I said eventually. He glanced up at the roofline. Want help? I considered it. Ask me properly. He almost smiled. Dad, he said, may I help you clear the gutters? Yes, I said. You may. He climbed the ladder. I held it steady from below. It was, I think, the first honest division of labor we'd had in years. But restoring a house is simpler than restoring trust. And there was still one document left to revise. 2 weeks after the meeting downtown, I asked Margaret to prepare a full estate review. Not an emergency adjustment, not a reaction, a clarification. We met again in the smaller conference room this time. No skyline, just a round table and a yellow legal pad in front of me. Succession? She asked. Structure, I replied. Succession will follow structure. She nodded. For years, Eleanor and I had kept the plan straightforward. The operating company would remain under Whitaker Holdings. Upon my death, the voting shares would transfer into the family trust, with Daniel as primary beneficiary and eventual controlling trustee. It was clean, efficient, built on assumption. Assumption is a fragile foundation. I want to add conditions. I said. Margaret didn't raise an eyebrow. Character-based or competency-based? Both. We revised the trust so that voting control would transfer not immediately upon my passing, but through phased stewardship. An independent co-trustee would serve alongside Daniel for a fixed term. Major structural decisions would require dual authorization. Asset liquidation beyond a defined threshold would trigger mandatory review, not because I believed Daniel incapable, because I believed him human. Entitlement often grows in silence. I had allowed too much silence. What prompted this? Margaret asked gently. My son mistook access for ownership, I said. That is partly my fault. She waited. I spoke about the company as though it were inevitable inheritance. I never described it as responsibility. I never required him to understand its weight. Margaret made a small note on her pad. We can also include a stewardship clause, she said. Defined participation benchmarks before full control vests. Yes, I said. He should serve on the board formally. Quarterly reviews. Operational exposure, not symbolic. Understood. When the documents were ready, I didn't mail them. I invited Daniel to dinner. Not at a restaurant. At the house. He arrived alone this time. No Marisa, no folder. He brought a bottle of wine he knew I wouldn't open on a Tuesday. We ate at the same oak table where he had once spread out algebra homework and where, months earlier, he had placed power of attorney forms between us. After the plates were cleared, I slid a single envelope across the table. What's this? He asked. The future? I said. He opened it slowly, scanning the summary pages. His eyes moved back to the top, then down again. You added a co-trustee. Yes. You added phased control. Yes. He looked up at me. You don't trust me. I considered the word carefully. I don't trust anyone with unchecked authority, I said, including myself. He absorbed that. This is because of what happened. This is because of what I learned, I corrected. And what did you learn? That love does not exempt us from structure. Silence settled over the table. I thought you were slipping away, he said quietly. After Mom, you seemed smaller. Grief is not diminishment, I replied. It is compression. He looked down at the papers again. You really never lost control, he said. Wasn't a question. No. And you let me believe you had. I let you reveal what you believed. That stung him, but not unfairly. He leaned back in his chair. I was scared, he admitted. Scared I'd have to clean up chaos later. Scared I'd miss something important. And maybe, he paused, maybe I was also impatient. For what? For it to be my turn. The honesty in that sentence mattered more than the earlier confidence in the boardroom. Your turn will come, I said. If you prepare for it? He nodded slowly. This feels like a test. It is, he almost smiled. You always did like exams. I like clarity. We sat in quiet understanding for a long moment. Are you cutting me out? He asked finally. No, I said. I am inviting you in. Properly. There is a difference between inheritance and initiation. One assumes inevitability. The other requires growth. Over the following months, Daniel attended every quarterly review. Not as a rescuer, not as an overseer, as a participant. He asked better questions. Fewer assumptions. He visited the warehouse, something he hadn't done in years, and walked the floor with the operations manager. He listened more than he spoke. One evening after a board meeting, he lingered behind. I didn't understand how layered this was, he said. It wasn't designed to be obvious. Why didn't you ever explain it? You never asked. He nodded, accepting the symmetry. At home, my routines remain unchanged. I still wake at 5:30. I still grind my own coffee. I still read the paper copy of the financial pages. Even though I could access them instantly on a screen, my cards work when I use them, not because I proved a point, but because I never surrendered the pen that signs their authority. There are men my age who respond to betrayal with spectacle, lawsuits, estrangement, dramatic disinheritance. I understand the impulse, but dignity is quieter than revenge. I did not need to humiliate my son to restore balance. I needed to remind him, and perhaps myself, that strength does not evaporate with age. It simply changes posture. The world has a habit of treating older men as if they are already halfway gone. We are not gone. We are condensed. What happened between Daniel and me was not theft. It was presumption. And presumption, left uncorrected, becomes precedent. That was the detail he forgot. Control is not transferred by confidence. It is transferred by consent. And mine was never given.